Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me at the back? Because yesterday people were saying my voice is a bit too soft and so people can't hear me clearly. So, can you hear me properly? Fantastic. Okay. So, yesterday we went on a journey. We reflected on the case of a 39-year-old man. And this 39-year-old man had end-stage renal failure and he was waiting for a kidney transplant. And we talked about his concept of time. And then we used that concept of time and we reflected upon Surah Wal-Asr. We spoke about having to wake up to a reality, a truth which we have to accept. We then explained that from this truth, we have to be patient, and we need to be steadfast, and we need to do good deeds. We spoke about how if we fail to wake up from that reality, and if we fail to realize the truth, if we fail to be patient and help others wake up to this reality, then we, our own selves, may drown. We then talked about the concept of truth and what it means to tell the truth. And to remind you, we had two versions of the truth. There was a physical reality, which is this right now in this majlis, what we can actually see and hear. And then there is another reality, a spiritual reality. And that's a reality which we can't see or hear. We then spoke about how this truth shows itself and in what form this truth is written. We then talked about one of the truths, and we talked about one of the truths being the Quran, the word of Allah. Today, what I'm hoping to discuss is what makes the Quran a book which manifests the truth, and what makes it so miraculous. I did just want to share a disclaimer here that I'm not here to preach or counsel. I'm quite simply sharing reflections of things that I've learned over the last few years. And the contents of this discussion today, it can't do justice to the subject matter, because the subject matter is so intense that you could study this for hours and days and weeks and months and years and still not exhaust the multiple literary and other miracles of the Quran. And today is just a reflection for us to start or continue our own journey with the Quran. The other thing to say here is that we talk about miracles of the Quran, and we have to take this lightly because the Quran is not a book of science. It simply contains information which conforms to what we know in science today. So if you go and have a discussion with someone that says, look, the Quran has all these miracles, therefore it's the word of God, it's not necessarily a convincing argument to present this in this manner. Rather, when the Quran was actually revealed 1400 years ago, all that knowledge wasn't actually present. So ask yourself, is the Quran a miracle? What do you think? Is the Quran a miracle? Yeah, so there's some nods around the room. And I had to actually Google the word miracle to fully appreciate what it actually meant. So when I stuck miracle into Google, as you do, it said it was an extraordinary and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific law, and therefore attributed to a divine agency. So, in essence, if you can't explain it using science, then it's a miracle. And I found that definition quite fascinating, actually. And I would say it's quite a big thing to call the Quran a miracle then. So what you're saying is that the Quran is a miracle, so it's a book that you can't explain through natural scientific law and order. I mean, we have to test that, right? You can't just say it's a miracle, you've got to put it to the test. So what makes it so different to all the other books that we've got sitting on the bookshelves? I mean, if you look at the wall at the back, there's, 100 books. One of them is perhaps the Quran. What's different about it? I'm going to be as efficient as I can be here because it's a very focused discussion today. But I want you to take yourself back to when the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. Were there any libraries when the Quran was revealed? No. Were there any translations of other scriptures, the Torah, the Bible, when the Quran was revealed in Arabia? No. Was there any significant knowledge of the natural sciences when the Quran was revealed at that time? No. Was there any formal educational system that the Arabs had in that day? No. It was actually the age of absolute ignorance. They called it the age of Jahiliyyah, where they were concerned about burying their baby daughters. To them, knowledge wasn't something that they pursued. There's only one thing that the Arabs of that time took great pride in, and that was mastery of language, mastery of speech, mastery of poetry. So when they heard some great poetry, some great speech, they listened. So then this young man called Muhammad, who had no formal education, starts reciting these verses and people start listening. And the words he utters aren't revealed in a book. He's not given a book and then he starts reciting it. He starts reciting it from speech. And this speech has such immense power that it moves people from within. The words spoken at that time were so unique in their style, their stanza, their category, the power, that people from that time knew that this could not have been the words of an uneducated man. So, if I was at the table eating with you and I just started speaking in Shakespearean English, you'd know that this is not normal English that we speak in Leicester. This is Shakespearean English. So, try and use that example perhaps. So, the Arabic and literary miracle of the Quran is so mind-bogglingly ridiculous that you'd have to try and study it to understand it and grasp Arabic language, and I don't. Hopefully, we can discuss one of these literary miracles in a future discussion, and I'll send you one link, hopefully, via WhatsApp, which is actually, I found it quite fascinating. So, we've already established then, so that Arabia at that time, there was no formal educational system, nobody knew much about anything except for the power of speech. So I just want to consider a few more examples now of some of the tokens, the miracles perhaps, which are contained within the Quran, which are consistent in scientific knowledge today. So it was only around 150 years ago that the world thought that the sun was in the middle of the solar system and did not move. So 150 years ago, scientific scriptures of that time said that the sun was in the middle of the universe and everything else moved around it. This was called Copernicus's theory. It was only very recently that we realized that Allah's truth in the Quran has been scientific fact, that all celestial bodies move. When I mean celestial, I mean the moon and the stars and the sun and the earth. Everything moves in orbit. And so if I take you to Surah 21, verse 33, Allah says, Allah is the one who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon. Each one is traveling in an orbit with its own motion. Remember, this was a book that was revealed where no knowledge of this kind existed. Just something that fascinates me is the passages which pertain to human development in the Quran. So, the Quran actually speaks about how a baby is formed in a mother's womb. It says, we placed him as a sperm drop in a place of settlement, firmly fixed, then made the drop into an alaqa, and then changed the alaqa into a lump, and we made out of that lump into bones, then we closed the bones with flesh, then we caused him to grow and come into being and attain the human form. Don't expect to remember all of that, I'm not sure I do after years of studying embryology years ago, but what we know now is that this actually describes the correct chronological order in the way that the human being is actually made in the mother's womb. And there are also fascinating things. So not only does it describe the correct chronological order by which this happens, it uses certain words that just intrigue us. So it uses the word alaqa, okay? So the alaqa, if you translate it into English, it means three things. It means a blood clot, number one. Number two, it means something which suspends. And number three, it means a leech-like structure. And actually, if you look at human embryonic development, even using the latest MRI technology where you look at things in the most minutest of details, it confirms this truth. If you look at a MRI scan of a human embryo in the early stages of development, it confirms that actually it looks like a leech. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, if I showed you pictures, it would do it justice. Yeah. So Keith Moore was he's the author of this embryology book, and what he said was, verbatim, the descriptions of the human embryo in the Quran cannot be described by scientific knowledge in the 7th century alone. The only reasonable conclusion is that these descriptions reveal to Muhammad from Allah. There are so many other examples that you can cite, but remember, these are only examples and they conform to what we know of science today. The other thing just to think about is that, going back to the power of the message, the book has set a precedence in the sense that there is no other book in the history of man which has turned a lawless society into law, which has given rights to people who previously had no rights. So you know how today we hear in secular society, yes, Islam, it suppresses women and all this stuff. Islam was actually the first religion who gave rights to women, who gave rights of inheritance and so on and so forth, who actually limited the number of wives that a man could marry. Just hold on, let's just rephrase that. So hold on, what I'm saying to you is that Christianity and Judaism and all these religions were revealed before, they didn't place limits on the number of wives a man could marry. Islam did 1400 years ago. It gave rights to women in a whole host of ways. It stopped these terrible practices that even today we look at and think actually Islam was well ahead of its time 1400 years ago. The other thing I just want to share is that there are other messengers of Allah who were given miracles also. So let's take Isa Nabi, Jesus, alayhi salam. So what miracles was Jesus given? Any ideas?
He could speak from the cradle.
Yeah, absolutely. He spoke from the cradle. Any other miracles?
Healed people.
He healed people, didn't he? So he basically, he gave life to those who were dead. Yeah. He cured people of blindness. He cured people of leprosy. Yeah. And so, what about Musa alayhi salam? What miracles did he show to his people?
Magic.
Absolutely. Moshe said magic, and is absolutely right. The people of Egypt at that time prided themselves in magicianry, whatever you call it, right? Yeah. This is what they did, and Musa Nabi, his miracles included turning the staff into a snake, and parting the ocean so the people of Israel were free. So just consider the type of miracles these were. These messengers required miracles to confirm their book, and it was a miracle of the eyes. Yeah. So if you said that Jesus gave somebody who is blind eyesight, and he brought the dead back to life, and he cured somebody of leprosy, it was a miracle of the eyes. You had to see it to believe it. Yeah? Do you agree? Moses, go back to him. If he turned the staff into a snake and he parted the sea, it was a miracle of the eyes. What was so unique about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's miracle? What miracle of the eyes did he have? Did he have a miracle of the eyes? An obvious miracle of the eyes? No, not really. His miracle was that of the ears, right? And the miracle of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the Quran itself. And it's the content within the Quran itself which proves that it's the book of Allah. And the miraculous thing here is that it's the only miracle which stands the test of time. And the miracle of the eyes can never stand the test of time. You see a miracle of the eyes, it's gone in that moment. A miracle of the ears stays and stands the test of time. The other thing to sort of consider, the ease by which the Quran is remembered. It's got 600 pages, 6,000 verses. People remember it from start to finish, even though they don't understand Arabic or where Arabic isn't their first language. that's miraculous. You've got people who don't understand Arabic who know this book inside out. Name one other book where this happens. It's just a miracle within itself. And it's the content itself. It's the content itself which bears witness to the miracle of the Quran and the spiritual pearls it is able to share. Like the two surahs we discussed yesterday, Surah Wal-Asr and Surah Ikhlas. And remember, we made a point yesterday that the superiority of the word of Allah to the word of man is the same as the superiority of Allah to man. So when the Quran is Allah's speech, His speech is going to be nothing like our speech. And this may allow us then to follow the light which is inherently present within that book. Ultimately, it's this light of truth within the Quran which is the reason Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his faithful fought for, to protect this divine truth against falsehood. Allah had guaranteed them victory within the actual Quran through His promise that this book would remain uncorrupted for the rest of time. So to conclude then, if you remember, we started talking about the concept of time, and yesterday we spoke about the truth. Today we spoke about why we believe the Quran to be the truth. As part of this chain of Surah Wal-Asr, because actually if you think about our discussions, the foundation is actually Surah Wal-Asr. We talked about time, and then yesterday we talked about the truth. Today we talked about an element of the truth. And tomorrow, inshallah, I hope to speak about patience. And what it actually means to be patient in a practical sense. And how the courage, sincerity, and patience demonstrated by Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala was the peak of human character and integrity, inshallah. So I hope you gained a few nuggets of knowledge and wisdom through this discussion today. Yesterday I had a bit of feedback. There's somebody who talked about diversity. They said, why are we so sort of not diverse? And I thought that was an interesting perspective. And hopefully we'll put that question into the car park. And if we've got time on Saturday and Sunday, any questions that we have, we'll just discuss openly and have a general think about them. The second question that I had was, we talked about the will of Allah as being the truth. And it was a really interesting question from Hussein, actually. He said, if everything is willed by Allah, doesn't that make Allah such a dictatorial Lord? He dictates absolutely everything. And we had to think about this, and we thought, well, it's the will of Allah itself which willed our existences into being that allowed us to have this discussion. So just reflect on that. It's quite a big nugget that I've just thrown at you, and hopefully tomorrow we'll talk about patience. Jazakallah.